So before we get started with questions, I was wondering how many of you had heard about the new report. It was all over ABC News back the beginning of May about the CDC found a dog that had spread plague to 4 different people in Colorado. Anything on the news about dogs always catches my attention right away. So this is actually the first report of a dog infecting a human with the plague in the U.S. And it was about a 2-year-old pit bull. Poor old pit bulls, it always seems like they're to blame for everything. So it got sick last summer, and it had a fever, and its jaw was really, really rigid, and it had some other symptoms too. And it got really, really sick really quick. And so bad, in fact, that they ended up putting it to sleep after just a day. But then maybe 4 days later, the dog's owner got sick and had a fever and had a cough and was actually coughing blood and got worse and worse over the next 4 hours. And I guess at the hospital they suspected plague. It's something that happens occasionally out west. But the initial blood culture was wrong. They identified it wrong. But then as the patient's symptoms grew worse and worse, they decided to rerun the test, and they found that this human patient, definitely had pneumonic plague, which is well, I'll get into that in a little bit, but it's the respiratory form of plague. It's a little bit different than bubonic plague. So then they actually, sounds awful, but they dug up the dog and they tested the dog's remained, and they found that the dog was also positive for the plague. So that was what the dog had died of. So plague it's caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis. And we humans can usually get it a couple different ways. I think the way that most people have heard of is through flea bites. So rodents will get the plague and they'll die, and the fleas on them are hungry and they're looking for other sources of blood, so then they'll jump on humans and we can get plague that way. And dogs and cats can bring fleas that have plague into the home, and if they get it this way, if it's from a flea and the infection actually gets in the glands, it's called bubonic plague. Another form of plague would be when you have contact with contaminated fluid or tissue. So humans can get infected if they're, handling the body fluids of a plague-infected animal, or like a hunter maybe skinning a rabbit, or other little animal like that without taking the proper precautions could get a different form of that plague bacteria. And when it's bloodborne like this, it's called septicemic plague. The third way you can get plague is what happened with this dog, is through infectious droplets. So when a person has pneumonia, or in this case it was probably a little rodent had pneumonia, spread it to the dog, and then the dog sneezed and the droplets got inhaled by the human, and the human got what's called pneumonic plague, which is when you get the bacteria in your lungs. And that's actually the worst form, because you can get sick pretty fast, and your chances of getting really fatally ill are increased when it's pneumonic plague. So I guess the big surprise here was that the source of this little mini outbreak of 4 people was a dog, because dogs don't usually get real sick after they're infected with the plague, or if they do, it's minor. A little bit different with cats. Cats are more susceptible to the plague, probably because they'll eat, rodents. They hunt. And sick cats can then, sneeze and give it to their owners. So a more likely scenario would be, let's say you have a cat out west that plays or eats a prairie dog, or those prairie dog's fleas get on the cat, and then the cat sneezes and coughs and gives it to the owner. That would be a much more common scenario. Prairie dogs in particular in the Southwest are prone to get plague. So sometimes there'll be little isolated outbreaks of it because of the prairie dogs. But the thing in this case that was different is that it was a dog that transmitted it. So the dog's owner, I guess, was sick for about 3 weeks, was in the hospital, but did recover. And in addition to the dog's owner, a real close friend of the owner got it, and also 2 of the veterinary employees that handled the dog got it and had to be treated. But all of them are okay. Just kind of rare that you get plague from a dog. Plague in general would be rare, but especially from a dog. And I guess that just tells us it's important when you see a sick patient, animal or human, to think of everything, even those really weird things that you don't hear about much anymore, like the plague.